And welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Darren Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And today we will be looking at, maybe not the notorious, but maybe the not so fondly remembered Ghostbusters II from 1989, directed by Ivan Reitman. Kind of doing that in celebration of Ghostbusters Afterlife, which comes out, I believe, the 19th of this month. So we want to kind of jump on that bandwagon and see if we can talk anything interesting there. But before we talk about everyone's favorite ghost busting
the best movie ever made.
Let's go ahead and talk about the movie we chatted about last week, which is your choice. We talked about Nightmare on Elm Street. How did we come down on that one for our annual Halloween episode?
Well, I think we both agreed it was worth remembering, right? Or did you think it was worth a remake? I forget.
Well, I think we talked about how a lot of the filmmaking was kind of amateurish. It wasn't really as effective as a lot of even other horror movies of the time, like Blood Simple, stuff like that. But I don't want to be the guy that tells you that you have no right to enjoy a movie that you liked as a child. When I was talking about we were going to be doing Nightmare on Elm Street, I had a Twitter friend that basically come in and said, "This is my favorite movie of all time." And I wrote back saying, "Oh no," and like a little scared face. I don't want to be, so I'm kind of glad that even though the filmmaking could have been done better, it made such an impact that there is no need to try and redo that again. They already did, and it didn't work. I don't want to be the guy that tramples on somebody's favorite movie, no matter what that is, what may be.
Yeah, I mean, and this movie was a big movie for me when I was growing up. I really loved this whole franchise of Freddy Krueger and all these movies. I got into it a lot when I was a kid. And so to revisit it was a lot of fun for me. And what was funny about doing that episode is I watched the movie and then we did the episode. And then later that night, I saw that Netflix had that Movies That Made Us series with Nightmare on Elm Street. So I watched that. I was like, well, I should have watched that before doing the episode, but it was fun. It was kind of like a Nightmare on Elm Street marathon that day. It was pretty fun.
Okay, well, that's cool. Was there anything said in that special that you wish you could have said?
Yes, there was. And in fact, it kind of made me think, you know what? It is a pretty good movie. Even though we talked about how things were kind of, like I say, amateur, but there was like, you know what? They tried really hard and they did a good job with what they had. So I commend them for what they did.
Okay, absolutely. So let's go ahead and speaking of people's favorite movie and the reaction that it gets when somebody tries to remake it, let's go ahead and talk about Ghostbusters 2. But before we do that, let's go ahead and watch the trailer.
All right.
At the stroke of midnight, on New Year's Eve of the last decade of the 20th century, America's largest city is about to pay for the nastiness of its inhabitants. When that day comes, when the slime starts to rise,
the Titanic just arrived.
When ghosts start arriving by the boatload,
We gotta find the guys.
there's only one thing to do.
Sometimes weird things happen. Someone has to deal with it. And who are you gonna call? All right, suck in the guts, guys. We're the Ghostbusters.
The superstars of the supernatural are back to nuke the spooks.
Two in the box.
Ready to go.
We be fast and
They be slow.
Make some time.
Don't put any of those old cheap moves on me.
no.
It's different.
I have all new cheap moves.
Raise your spirits.
If we don't do something by midnight, you will be remembered in history as the man who let New York get sucked down into the 10th level of hell.
And kick some slime.
Looks like a giant Jell-O mold. I hate Jell-O. Oh, come on. There's always room for Jell-O. Happy New Year. Close 'em.
Ghostbusters 2.
You're short, your belly button sticks out too far, and you're a terrible burden on your poor mother.
Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Sigourney Weaver, Harold Ramis, Rick Moranis, and Ernie Hudson in an Ivan Reitman film. Ghostbusters 2.
We're the best, we're the beautiful, we're the only Ghostbusters. We're back. Who you gonna call?
Okay, so Ghostbusters 2, directed by Ivan Reitman, starring, the greats, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, Sigourney Weaver, Rick Moranis, Ernie Hudson. Did I miss anybody? Those are all the...
That covers it, yeah.
Max von Sydow. There's a voice. That's going to be my arch nemesis because I don't think I'm ever going to pronounce his name right. Is it Sydow? How do we pronounce his name in
Flash? Sydow last time. Sydow.
Like side eye. Okay, hopefully I'm getting it right. If not, forgive me, Max von Sydow and family. Anyway, so I mentioned it briefly at the end of our last episode. We've got Ghostbusters Afterlife coming out, and so I kind of wanted to, with the kind of the format of our new season, to kind of try it in with that. Obviously, I didn't want to talk about Ghostbusters because that's just a formative movie. I don't know if I can add anything to it that anybody has already said about it. Okay. And then the Ghostbusters 2016, or Lady Ghostbusters, we chatted about that briefly during our inaugural episode, and we trying to bring up like nostalgia and how it can be dangerous. I want to talk about that for a little bit, but again, I don't want to come off as misogynist. This is just how the world is today. People are going to automatically think the movie, we don't like the movie because we hate women, which is really not the case. There are so many other things that a movie that make or break movies. So I didn't want to talk about those two, but Ghostbusters 2 obviously is one that, people don't usually talk about. I think it has a resurgent. It didn't do that well at the box office, especially the summer that Batman and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Lethal Weapon 2 came out. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, also with Rick Moranis. It kind of faded into the background, even though I think it was the 8th highest grossing movie of its year. But I think it just rubbed people the wrong way. So, let's chat about that one for a little bit and see if we come up with any different ideas. My history with the movie is, like I said, we talked about in our Batman episode. Batman was my whole summer. I didn't even realize that my favorite movie came out that same year because Batman was everything. And it kind of raised my awareness because I knew Ghostbusters was pretty big. And so I was excited for that one. It just came out the week before Batman, I believe. And I remember seeing it in New York and just being broadsided by the movie because it just didn't live up to the magic of my memories of the first one, which again is dangerous at the time. And I think because revisiting it later and having it be not as bad as I remember, I just think, they say about some movies how the ending of a movie, if it's bad, that's all you'll remember the movie. Or if it's a bad movie and has a great ending, you'll remember the movie as good, even though the rest of the movie isn't that great because the ending was so good. So it was kind of the opposite for this. And it's just one of those movies that you walk out of. And if I walked out of and thought, it just disappeared like Teflon. It's like, well, that was dumb. And then that's it because I had Batman to look forward to. But again, revisiting it later, there is a lot of good stuff, I think, in the movie, especially before the ending. There's a lot of good comedy bits and a lot of good humor. There's some good themes in the fabric of the narrative that we'll talk about a little bit later. But so obviously my opinion of it has changed, not much, but it has altered a little bit. What's been your history with Ghostbusters 2?
Well, I don't remember when I first saw this movie. I know it wasn't in the theater. It was probably on VHS with my family, like always. But I don't remember really liking it. I did like the first one. I liked, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I liked the song, Who You Gonna Call. Ray Parker Jr., I think, wrote that, right? Yeah. I liked that. And that was kind of it. Like, I never really, if people were watching the movie, I wouldn't not sit down with them and enjoy it with them. I would enjoy the movie. It's fine, but it's not something that I would go out of my way to watch. I wouldn't pick that one on purpose. You know what I mean?
You're talking about the original Ghostbusters. The
original, but also the second one, like it just, like you said, it just kind of was like lost on me. I didn't really get attached to it in any way. But this time when I watched it, a lot of the things that I didn't catch as a kid that were lost on me, I was like, wow, that was pretty funny. And I found myself laughing at a lot of the jokes that I didn't get when I was younger. And a lot of things, that I didn't get then, I got now. So that was really fun. I watched it with my family too. And so my kids were enjoying it, and it was a lot more enjoyable this time around. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I think you're saying you watch it with your kids. One of the things I want to talk about, is this movie scary? Is Ghostbusters 2 scary? I know that the first Ghostbusters had, the part where Dana's been possessed and she's floating above her bed, and Bateman kind of leans under her and says, "Please come down." And she roars at him. I remember freaking out in the theater and my mom getting so upset because I just screamed so loud. She's like, "I'm never taking you to another movie again," because I just didn't react to it that well. It was just, there's a lot of good scares. The part where, again, Dana's, before she's possessed and she's kind of grabbed and yanked into her kitchen by one of the demon dogs, that's fairly terrifying. I think the first movie has a lot of good scares mixed with the comedy, but this one was a little more audience friendly, I guess you could say. It was kind of more cartoonish, which we'll talk about.
I would agree with you that there's some creepy, scary parts in the first one, but also the second one had some moments too. I mean, when I was younger, I remember the painting of Vigo always creeped me out. And when he turns into that demon face, that always creeped me out too. There were some moments where my daughter, was kind of like, too scary, too scary. So I can see the kids thinking that it was kind of, scary or too adult for kids.
Okay. Have they watched the first one or just the second one?
The second one. We saw the first one a while ago. Okay.
So they just watched this one afresh.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, like I said, watching the movie in a theater and having it disappear because my mind was elsewhere, kind of filtered to other movies. I've never known the history of this movie. It's interesting to read. It was kind of mind altering reading like how it was a troubled production, because it was 5 years in between. The former studio head, Frank Price of Columbia, that was blockbusters were his big thing. And so when this David Putnam guy became the new chair of Columbia Pictures, he didn't want to do the expensive movies. He wanted to fall back on more maybe foreign films or smaller budget movies. He didn't want to kind of risk it all. And so Ghostbusters, he didn't really want to do a sequel to it. And also Bill Murray, who'd retired from acting the same year that Ghostbusters came out, because he also did The River's Edge. And that had such a poor reception. It was like a dream project of his, that he stopped acting for like 5 years. He didn't come back until Scrooge. I thought that was interesting. But this Putnam guy badmouthed Murray in public. He just basically said, this guy, like, he's a taker. What did he say? He says, he's an actor who makes millions of dollars from Hollywood and he never gives back to his art. And so that rubbed Murray the wrong way. But then when, what was her name? Dawn Steele, the new chair, replaced this Putnam guy, she put Ghostbusters on the front burner. Like, that was a priority that she made. But none of the actors wanted to do it. Ivan Reitman did not want to make this movie. And, they had kind of fractured relationships since then, and they weren't getting along. And so they're worried about, Murray was worried about coming back. He didn't want to do a sequel because he always said it was like cheap to do that kind of thing. And so you had these kind of conflicting personalities, and they all had control over the franchise. So they all had to agree on the final script before they could move forward. And it just went through so many iterations. Yeah. I know the history with the first Ghostbusters is that Dan Aykroyd, when he wrote it, the original script was like, it was set in the future, and there were different sects and groups of Ghostbusters that were just like firemen or policemen. Like, ghosts were such the norm, and it was so expensive that it would have cost $300 million. And so when they brought Harold Ramis on board, they pared it way down, and they kind of, which I think was one of the geniuses of the original Ghostbusters, is they made it real, but then they had the fantastical. But then you also had Murray in there to kind of joke around and let you know that, he's reacting, it's sarcastic, but it let you know that it was supposed to be a fun time. And Aykroyd, I think he wrote it like Dana Barrett got kidnapped for the sequel, and she was taken to Scotland, and she found these like magic rings, and the Ghostbusters had to travel in a 2,000-mile tube underground to find her. And so it was just really this outlandish thing. And again, and we'll talk about this a lot with this movie. It's just kind of repeated stories and repeated narratives. Ramis came on board and decided, no, we've got to pare this back and kind of keep with the continuity and base it in New York and have it be realistic. And so Ramis's idea, and this is one of our topics we'll talk about later, was to focus on like all the negative energy that had been built up in New York that was kind of bringing out the evil slime or whatever. It was like the negativity and the anger was manifesting itself. And he wanted to focus on that because, the modern decay and, the cities and stuff like that. And people which is in the age of social media and the anger that's going around and just the hate speech and everything, it's more timely today, I think, than it probably was back in 1989. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I can see that. I think if they were to make that same movie today, the sludge would be like a river running down the streets. It wouldn't just be under the ground. It'd be like flowing
Yeah.
through the buildings because there's so much negativity.
Right. Or I like reading, again, Ramis he's one of those guys that you don't realize how much he meant to you until he's gone. But just the way that he described the script and how he just said, he thought it would be funny that, what did he say? He said that comedically it suggested that what if everyone in New York City had to be nice for 48 hours? Otherwise it would cause the destruction of their whole city.
That was one of the best lines in the movie when the mayor's like, or the mayor, the mayor or the governor.
Yep. The mayor.
Anyway, but he was like, it's their God-given right to treat people like dirt. So
yeah, that's right. So I like that. And it's kind of peppered throughout the whole thing. I just thought that was interesting.
However, I think the concept is pretty corny.
You think it's corny?
About the negativity being sludge. Okay. I think that, and that's where it kind of lost me when I was younger, is like, okay, this slime is going to make the Statue of Liberty walk around. I was just like, that's enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it this time around. I enjoyed it. It was kind of like, oh, that's funny.
So the theme, it worked better for you this time than it did
as an adult. It worked better.
Okay. I know for a fact that the Statue of Liberty did not work better for me as an adult, but we'll come back to that.
My kids were enjoying it, so I was enjoying watching it.
That's good. I just remember when the statue started moving, and even then my 12-year-old brain was like, that's not possible. Like, what is this? What's happening? I've got better things to do. Anyway, so we'll come back to that. But when Murray and Ramis and Aykroyd and Reitman, when they're finally able to kind of, I think Murray's agent, he arranged like a lunch between the four of them, and they got together like a private lunch, and they chatted, and they had such a fun time together that they thought, yeah, let's go ahead and let's make this movie. And so that's when they wrote the script, and that's when they did all this the pre-production and getting the writing and everything. But I think some of the chemistry translates still pretty well. I mean, from watching the original Ghostbusters, they had some good lines together, and you could tell they're having a good time together. Yeah,
I think so. I think that's what the movie had going for it. I was going to say there are some positive things about Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2, and I think the ensemble cast and the different characters and what they bring to the table, that all kind of meshes. There's a good dynamic there.
Right.
You have all different kind of characters. You have the Winston, who's the everyman. You have Ray, who's like just a lovable, fun guy, and then you have Egon, the scientific nerd guy, and then you have Murray, who's kind of like the smooth talking, charismatic a-hole.
Yeah, kind of the spokesman for the group.
Yeah.
Right?
I want to say this too. When I was younger, I think why I didn't like it for the most part was Bill Murray. There was something about him that I didn't like when I was a kid. I didn't like the way he looked on screen. I've seen movies that he'd done, like Stripes and other things, and I never liked him. And I was kind of like, that guy's in this movie, you know what I mean? So I had a problem with Bill Murray. And it wasn't until I became an adult that I started to appreciate Bill Murray as an actor and what he actually brought to the table. Yeah. But as a kid, I was like, I hate that guy.
Yeah, well, he's kind of standoffish, and he's kind of, especially in the first Ghostbusters, he's a jerk. I mean, when you watch it now, the scenes with Sigourney Weaver are very skeevy, and he's, it wouldn't stand today the way that he kind of approaches their relationship. Before we talk about the legacy, the last thing I wanted to mention about the making of, we talked about it with your kids, is the movie, comparatively to the first one, it's a lot more cartoonish. Yeah. And that's something that I noticed. But then when I started reading the history, I saw the part where I think the real Ghostbusters, I don't know if you'd ever seen that cartoon. It aired, I think, from 1986. So it aired after the original Ghostbusters came out, and then was popular before they made the second Ghostbusters. But Columbia wanted to integrate a lot of the kiddie stuff from the cartoon into the movie. And so I don't remember the first movie being that cartoonish. It was more straightforward and more of a smart comedy. And this one, bringing Slimer back, obviously from the cartoon, Janine, they made her more cartoonish. She was funny and kind of a nebbish in the first one, but this time she had colored hair. And so again, she seemed like an anime character in this one versus how she was in the first. So them integrating that did make it a little more kid friendly. And so I think that's probably why it plays better. Maybe to families than the first one did. So you talked briefly about your, like, Ghostbusters didn't really hit you, you said it wasn't that strong with you as a kid?
Yeah, like I could take it or leave it. I
Okay.
mean, it was there. I knew of it, and like I said, I enjoyed things about it, but it wasn't one of my favorite movies.
Right. And see me, I'm the opposite. I probably, like you would probably say, what, The Princess Bride is the most quotable movie of all time.
Yeah, one of them for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So if I had to choose, Princess Bride is one, but Ghostbusters is one that I know the dialogue front to back.
Yeah.
There are lines in every single scene that just crack me up, like small lines, big, broad comedic lines. And so it was, like I said, very formative for me growing up. It was one of those movies that I loved. I just like the idea of being scared and laughing at the same time. I don't think I'd experienced that before. So when we talked about Ghostbusters in our very first NostalgiaCast episode, I mentioned that the connection with a lot of people seems to be that the Ghostbusters are basically nerds that are kind of lambasted by society. They're kicked out of the university, and they end up becoming heroes by, they sleep in a firehouse, they fight ghosts, they get paid for it. As a kid, that's something that you kind of latch onto. And then I don't know, do you think that, obviously maybe you do, you probably do, but the attachment to the movie or the attachment to any movie, is the attachment too strong when a lady Ghostbusters comes out and some people feel the need to send death threats to the actresses? Do you think this, like the legacy of Ghostbusters, is worth that?
I don't think so. I think that's going overboard. I can see why people do get attached to it and why they have this nostalgia for it. But for me, it doesn't mean anything. I could care less if someone would make another sequel or a spin-off or something. It doesn't make a difference to me what you do with it, because I'm not that close to it.
Yeah.
But I can see why some people would have that reaction, even though I think it's over the top.
Right. Well, like we talked about, I have a stronger connection to Ghostbusters than you, but I don't think you should have that strong an attachment to anything that it causes you to wish violence on other people just because they're doing their jobs. I think that's really toxic and just terrible and inhuman. I don't know where these people think they have the right to do something like that. It's just a movie. I understand that if it means a lot to you, but like we say with all these remakes, it's not gonna, you still have your movie. You know what I mean? It's not gonna, a Lady Ghostbusters isn't gonna erase your infatuation with the old Ghostbusters, with the original Ghostbusters.
Yeah, if you don't like it, don't go see it.
Yeah, what's your problem? Like, I give every movie a chance, and that 2016 movie didn't really work for me, but you don't see me harping on it like every day.
Yeah.
About how it ruined my childhood and made my childhood seem trivial. I just think that's ridiculous. So as far as the legacy goes, I do. The one thing, because again, when all this toxicity comes out, you'll always see people come out and say, I don't understand what the big deal is anyway. This Ghostbusters isn't that good anyway. Like, what's the big deal? And that too, kind of minimizing the impact, that can be bad for people that did see a lot of themselves in it. There's just a fine balance that you have to strike. It's strange.
Yeah.
But if I was to sum up the movie, it's like, as far as the impact that it made, there hadn't been a movie at that point, because a lot of the comedy is improv. When you do like big special effects, I'm not sure how many people are aware that when you do a big, heavy special effects heavy movie, that takes a lot of prep, and you have to make sure you're hitting your marks and everything's working perfectly. Having Murray and Ramis and Aykroyd ad lib and make up stuff, and Moranis. I think I didn't mention Rick Moranis.
Yeah, I was going to mention him if you didn't. So
yeah, so Rick Moranis, like the whole scene when he's going around when he has that party with all his clients and he's just naming all the things, he made all that stuff up. Like that was ad libbed on the spot. It was all part of his character. And so when you're ad libbing all those things constantly, that is a tough job. I don't want to undersell how tough a job that is to make sure that the special effects also work as you're making up stuff on the fly.
Right.
So as far as the legacy of the movie Ghostbusters goes, I don't think that is something that we can just brush off. That is very important and very well done. And it works so well that Reitman, he's famous for saying that he released the movie. They were on a tight budget. He had like boss, what was it? I've got the note here. The Richard Edlund, who we talked about the week before, about Explorers. He's one of the top special effects gurus. His Boss Film Studios, they handled the effects for the first Ghostbusters, but again, it was a lot of spit and polish, like masking tape and glue, like and Elmer's glue trying to stick everything together. Reitman says they released the movie with unfinished special effects. And, I've never been able to spot stuff that doesn't work or that looks completely fake, because I think in the first movie, you're kind of caught up in the Murray one-liners and you're caught up with the jokes and the atmosphere it creates.
Yeah.
So I don't want to undersell the importance of, as far as an impact on filmmaking, that was big and it hit big with audiences. It shouldn't have worked, and it worked. It's just one of those miracle movies that became a hit just because it just jived with people at the right time.
Yeah, I think it definitely made a mark.
Yeah. So again, I don't want to kind of minimize that as far as that goes. So the thing with Ghostbusters 2, it doesn't really match exactly the snide humor of the first one. The first one is more, it's goofy, but it's very serious. It has a serious tone or a straight-laced tone. I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
The second one or the first one?
The first one is just very straightforward. And this one, it has a lot of different asides. It's a lot goofier. It's the Janusz, his character, the Peter McNichol. I think Peter McNichol's very funny in the part, but because I guess it was written like the character's name was Jason. It was very boring, and McNichol was like, I'm going to do all this other stuff. I'm going to like copy Meryl Streep's accent from Silkwood, and I'm going to bring all this other stuff. I'm going to make him a Carpathian. And Ivan Reitman was like, sure, go for it. And what he adds to the movie, there's a lot of funny lines. I like his first thing you see is like, he walks by somebody, he's like, what you're doing is bad. Like, I just want you to know that. And the actress is like, he tries to keep going with their scene. Thought that was really funny. And when he's like, don't be upset, Dana, like, you're going to be the mother of the ruler of the world. It's like, doesn't that sound nice? He's got a lot of good funny lines, but the humor with that villain, especially when he goes to see Dana at her apartment, and then the lights are all out and he has the lights in his eyes, or when he kidnaps baby Oscar and he's like dressed in drag with like the baby carriage,
like a nanny or something.
Yeah, like a lot of that comedy. What was his name? I had it in here. Anyway, a lot of that comedy did remind me of the first Ghostbusters. Neil Casey was the actor in Ghostbusters 2016. The villain in that, he's possessed, and it's just got a lot of goofy parts. And so the McNichol character, I don't think the humor of that character is as straight-laced as anything in the first movie. It was a lot goofier and maybe not as funny. It was more just silly. I don't know what you thought about that.
I can see that. But I really enjoyed this time around just the dialogue that Aykroyd and Ramis wrote for those two characters, especially. Their back and forth was cracking me up all throughout the whole movie. Yeah. And so I really appreciated that around this time.
Yeah, I had that in my notes here too. I had that they've got they've all got a good funny chemistry together. They all work together. Murray, obviously, there are literally scenes where Murray's like, when he comes into the bookstore for the first time and he's doing that silly accent, you can see Aykroyd and Ramis like smiling because they're just charmed by him. Yeah. But you were right. One of the notes I wrote, whenever Ramis and Aykroyd are together, I love the part where they're in Oscar's room and they're talking about how Egon never had a toy. And Aykroyd goes, I was like, you never even had a slinky? And he goes, I had part of a slinky. I straightened it. I thought that was really funny. They just had a lot of good comedy. I like the part where they're in they're developing their photographs and they stop while they're making copies and they're just talking about what they want for dinner. It's like Chinese, Thai? No, too spicy. Greek? It's like, and pizza? It's like thin or thick crust, like Chicago. Yeah. So a lot of that was like really funny. They just had this very easygoing relationship.
Yeah.
But like we talked about a lot of that comedy, and I could quote a lot of lines from that too. I love Murray when he goes to see Janusz. Am I pronouncing that right? Janusz?
I think so, yeah.
At the museum where Dana's there, and like he looks at the painting of Vigo, and he's like, "Oh, I can tell why he's sad. He's missing his kitten. Like, let me just paint a little kitten." And and so that's really funny. So there's just a lot of, it's that sarcastic humor, the ad libs that I like about the first one, and the first half of the movie. It does have a lot of that. I didn't remember it, especially from that first viewing, because I was so caught up. It gets sillier as it goes. And then I wrote down that at the hour and 26-minute mark, that's when the movie loses its gosh damn mind. When it decides we're going to go and we're going to hijack the Statue of Liberty. And I don't know. Have you ever been to the Statue of Liberty when you were in New York? Did you ever go?
I've seen it. I never went on the tour up inside those. But.
Okay. I tell this to people all the time. It takes a while to get out on the ferry to Ellis Island. And when I went to the Statue of Liberty, it was summer. And so what you do is you pay your ticket or whatever, you start at the bottom, and there's just a stairwell that just leads you up. And so, but you're all packed in there like sardines. And so I think I was maybe 10 or 11 or something like that. So you're in there and you're just packed, and it's hot and it's sweaty and it's humid. And it took 3 hours to get to the top.
Yeah.
And so by the time you get to the top and you look out the crown and you want to admire the view, you got so many people behind you that if you pause, people will start yelling at you from like 100 or 200 steps down because you're not moving.
Yeah.
And so 3 hours, you make it up, and then you're right back down. And so that was just one of the most excruciating experiences of my life.
Well, it's a similar experience with the Empire State Building nowadays too. It's a big tourist attraction. It's just, you go to the top, you get a picture, you go down.
Yeah. Wow. You know what I mean?
It's pretty horrific.
Yeah. It's just a big to do. But the thing with the Statue of Liberty is it's a shell. She's just a shell. So when they put the slime all over and everything, and they show her foot moving, I'm like, that is not possible because she's a shell. She's not able to move her feet. It would just be her like shimmying back and forth. So even as a 12-year-old, I was like, what is this? What are they doing? The fact that they go in the Statue of Liberty, and I always hate it in movies where there's peril. Like Dana and Janusz are in the museum, and she tries to get Oscar out, but then Janusz traps her behind like a cage, and then it cuts, and the Ghostbusters are still in the mental asylum, and they have to get out, and they have to go talk to the mayor, and then they go to the museum, and they try to get in, doesn't work, so they have to go out and get to Ellis Island on the ferry, and then they have to douse it with slime, and it takes like 7 hours to do all that stuff, and in between it's just Dana walking back and forth in her cage. I hate it when movies do that.
Right.
But and that's kind of the next topic I want to talk about. What do you think a good sequel does? What do you think is the effect of a good sequel?
Okay, well, for me, I really enjoy a sequel when it picks up where the last movie left off. Like an example I can think of is Back to the Future 2, when they show up right at Marty's, driveway, and they go off and they pick up right where it left off, so the next chapter can start. I want to see what happens next. Like, tell me the next chapter right now. Don't give me this 5 years later, 10 years later stuff. Just let me see what happens next. Tell me the rest of the story.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, I think that's important. I think it is important to kind of keep the same winning formula that you did have, but I don't want to see them follow it exactly. You know what I mean? I want them to be a little more creative and a little more imaginative with the formula that was working for them for the first one.
Right. Okay. So I don't know. When I see a sequel, I want to see more of the same. You want to recognize that what you're watching has at least some tangential like connection to the movie you saw last time, but I don't want to see them just retread everything. I want to have an actual story, and it's tough to do sequels that do that and take the characters and the themes to a new place. This is a weird year for movies because there were a lot of sequels, more sequels than there had been. Indiana Jones 3 came out. Star Trek 5 came out. Karate Kid 3, which we talked about during our Cobra Kai episode, that came out. Lethal Weapon 2, which we mentioned. Back to the Future 2, which you just mentioned. There are a lot of sequels. And some of those sequels do it right. I think Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, it's funny when people say that's their favorite. Not funny. I understand why because it's the most enjoyable, I think, out of all the Indiana Jones movies.
Yeah, I can see that.
But if you really think about it, it's the exact same template. Everything, this plot skeleton of Last Crusade is exactly the same.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's important that you keep that, that you stick with that. But I think it's still different enough that it's, it can be its own movie if it was, set aside.
Yeah. And the thing with Crusade is that Sean Connery's there. And their byplay with Harrison Ford is so funny, and it's so warm, and it's so welcome that you don't notice all the other stuff, that it's just, oh, that's a copy of Raiders. This is copying Raiders, that kind of thing. Lethal Weapon 2 is a good sequel, I think, because it takes the characters of Briggs and Murtaugh and it takes them on their next adventure. It has callbacks. It has the thing where Riggs turns out the bad guy murdered his wife. spoilers. And so he reverts back to his lethal self, because at the beginning of that movie, he's happy-go-lucky and it's fun watching them. And, it has all the callbacks. But then there are like, even Star Trek V tried to do different things, but just the whole history of that was kind of odd. And Back to the Future 2, I know a lot of people like that one, but that repeats so much of the first one to the point where it even goes back and it redoes scenes from the first one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I would say that's kind of what I enjoyed about it. I enjoyed watching them kind of try to find out a way how you could have Marty in the same place at the same time, and seeing the same, that was kind of fun for me.
Yeah. The technical side of Back to the Future 2 is great. For me, the heart is kind of missing that I had in the first Back to the Future. But again, it's like, it's a fine line. You like Toy Story 2 is a great sequel because everything, it has what the characters, but they're kind of, they've moved on. They're in new stages of their life. And it does have callbacks. When Buzz, they go to the store and the other Buzz takes over, and it reminds you, oh yeah, this Buzz Lightyear was like a blowhard. He didn't know he was a toy.
Yeah,
and so it has those flashbacks. And so it works beautifully, but as a new thing with callbacks that you don't maybe realize are callbacks. So the interesting thing about this movie, about Ghostbusters 2, is it's almost a carbon copy of the first Ghostbusters. It starts off with them as laughing stocks. They start to discover slowly that there's a menace that's slowly making its presence known. They become Ghostbusters and they become famous, again, and they become beloved. And then it ends with, them climbing a structure to fight the bad guy and stuff like that. And even the ending is especially, this part where they think they vanquished the villain, but there's just a quiet before the storm. And then the villain comes back even stronger. And then, they're covered in slime as opposed to covered in marshmallows. And so it's just strange.
Yeah.
With Ramis talking about how he wanted, and Reitman wanted to talk about not repeating the original, how much of it actually repeats the original. But it slowly loses me. But there was a point, again, when they decided to go in the Statue of Liberty, where I'm like, I give up. Like, I give up on this movie. It is not what I remember from the first one anymore. I know that you said your kids like the Statue of Liberty part, but every time that statue moved, my eyes glazed over. I was like, come on, give me a break.
Yeah, I also want to know where it went when it like breaks the ceiling, and then like next scene it's not there anymore. It's like, where'd the Statue of Liberty go?
Well, they show in the end after they and then like even worse than the statue, like they break through the skylight, which coming like the week before Batman is weird. That the shot of Batman coming through the skylight to save Vicky Bell from the Joker is very iconic. And so it's not really the same when the Ghostbusters do it. Yeah. But they slime Janusz, and they fight Vigo. And then he possesses, I like Aykroyd's dirt face, when he's being hypnotized. But then it possesses him for like a minute, and then they slime him, and then literally they blow slime in Vigo's face, just his head that makes its way back to the painting, and then his head like goes back, and then it explodes. And then I'm like, what the hell is this? Did they give up? Did they not have any ideas? You know what I mean? And then it does like they see the painting, like Bangman's like, I think it's one of the fettuccinis, and for some reason it's a painting of the four, like in robes. And then when it cuts outside, you see the Statue of Liberty lying on its back, like behind everybody. I don't know, it just that ending was just so not was anti what I loved about the first one. I really have a hard time with it. I'm not as angry about it. With all evidence of the contrary, it sounds like I'm angry about it, but I'm not quite as angry as I was watching the movie back in 1989, because now I watch it and it does have those funny parts. It does have those themes in it.
No, I was surprised at how funny it was. It kept catching me off guard. Like, oh my gosh, why am I laughing so hard at this? Because I didn't like it when I was younger, but I was like, oh, this is pretty funny.
And did you say that's just because you didn't understand the comedy?
I just think a lot of it was lost on me, or I just didn't care.
Okay. I know that, the Slimer stuff doesn't really work when they for some reason they thought, because the cartoon Slimer was a big hit, and they thought, oh, we're going to have Slimer here to be everybody's favorite part. Yeah. And I think Reitman says when they showed it to preview audiences, they just didn't react at all to Slimer. I know there was a deleted subplot where Lewis is just hanging around the firehouse and he's trying to be a Ghostbuster, and he keeps trying to catch Slimer and just can't do it. And then they kind of become friends at the end. And that's where that joke is, where he dresses up as a Ghostbuster. it's strange not seeing the rest of the deleted stuff there, because it seems like he's a little more like, how did we know he wanted to be a Ghostbuster? Like when Janine is zipping him up, like they're playing, Randy Edelman's music. What did you think of the music score?
Honestly, I didn't really notice it. Like, I thought it was fine. I didn't really notice it.
Okay, because one of my first notes is right off the bat, Randy Edelman's score is just terrible.
Okay.
I think the Elmer Bernstein score, like the theme for Ghostbusters, is very iconic, and so he doesn't even attempt that. It's just, there are moments, when Egon and Ray are trapped in the development room and everything's on fire, and Winston breaks in, and there's this grand like hero theme that comes in, and I'm like, all he did is come in with a fire extinguisher. Yeah. Or later when they're doused in the slime and they come out of the manhole, and Egon's like, let's get out of these clothes, and they're getting out and they're playing this giant heroic music as they're getting like stripping of their, I'm like, what? Like, why? Why do we need that?
I did notice the Bobby Brown song, and you see Bobby Brown as the doorman while they're playing his song. So I was like, okay, yeah, that's kind of corny.
I wrote that. Yeah, that's a little on the nose, having Bobby Brown make his cameo while the Bobby Brown song is playing on the soundtrack. So yeah, I don't know. It just, do you get what I'm saying? Like the ending just doesn't, it's completely a 180 from what I love about the first Ghostbusters.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
Okay. And then I don't know, like, what are your feelings of the Lady Ghostbusters, the 2016, without like,
well, I didn't see it all the way through. I fell asleep, but my wife watched it and she enjoyed it. I think she said that she liked the Chris Hemsworth stuff with him being the secretary or the receptionist, whatever.
Right. Well, we're talking about sequels and reboots and how they kind of have to embody the same spirit. Sorry, no pun intended, of Ghostbusters. Embody the same spirit of the original. The only issue with the 2016 Ghostbusters is not because they're women. Like, whatever. Like, sure, like, do that. I just think that the Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy and Kate McKinnon and Leslie Jones, they're much better than what this material is giving them. Like, what I love about the first Ghostbusters is it's very witty and it's sarcastic, and a lot of the lines, somebody blows their nose and you want to keep it, or that, remember, this reminds me of that time when you try to drill a hole through your head, like, you remember that, and Egon's like, oh, that would have worked if you hadn't stopped me. Or when Dana's possessed and she's like, do you want this body, and she goes, is this a trick question? It's got a lot of this snarky, sarcastic humor. And Lady Ghostbusters, I'm sorry if that sounds insensitive calling it that, but there's none of that in the movie. It's all just goofy. And the Chris Hemsworth character is kind of the embodiment of that, because there's a part where they're interviewing him and he's wearing glasses and there's a loud noise and he goes, oh my gosh, that's loud. And first the joke is like, he's not wearing lenses, but also, why, if he says it's loud, does he cover his eyes?
I don't know.
That's the opposite of witty. It's just silly.
Yeah. And
one of my absolute favorite joke in the first Ghostbusters is when they're at the hotel trying to find Slimer for the first time. I can't believe they give Slimer a credit. Like, at the end it says and Slimer after they've credited everybody else.
That's right. I didn't notice that.
Anyway, so when they're in the hotel, there's a part where they're showing them investigating, and Egon's got his EKG meter or whatever, and there's a guy that comes out of his hotel room, and Egon kind of looks him over, and then he takes his finger and he pushes him.
Yeah.
That's my favorite joke in the whole movie, just because it's so funny. Like, it's so in character.
Yeah.
But the McKinnon character in 2016 Ghostbusters, who's the equivalent of Egon, she doesn't have any of that. There's literally a dialogue scene between McCarthy and Mig where McKinnon is just in the background, just like dancing for no reason other than she's weird, and she's just parading back and forth, kicking her heels. And it's like, did they tell her to try to make this as interesting as possible? Because it's not working. There was no call for stuff like that. But that's how the whole movie is. And then it's even weirder having like Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson and Sigourney Weaver pop up in the movie, but not as their characters from like as completely different characters.
Yeah.
And every time they show up, it's like, oh yeah, they were from the original Ghostbusters, which is something that I do not want from a movie. I don't want to be reminded that there's a better movie that exists out there that I could be watching instead of whatever I'm watching now. Yeah. But again, it has nothing to do with the actresses. Like I said, they've been very, very funny in a lot of other things that they've done. It just, the 2016 reboot or remake just doesn't have the same sarcastic witticisms that I loved of the first one. And so it's too far from what, and even on its own level, I wouldn't be able to enjoy a movie like that. That's just plain silly and there's no wit to it.
Yeah.
So especially the ending of Ghostbusters 2, that just seems to be where they went. They just gave up and they just went for the silly stuff. There's nothing, as soon as they get in the Statue of Liberty, there's no more witty lines. It's like all silliness from then on. And the staging is wonky and it just reminds you of the first one and how just they're copying it. I don't know. Just it didn't ruin the movie for me this time because so much else worked, I think. Let's talk about the theme of the movie. I liked, again, the positivity versus negativity. The second note that I had is that as soon as you hear Randy Edelman's music, and it just didn't work for me. The first thing you see is Dana, pushing Oscar in his stroller, and you see like a parking enforcement officer arguing with somebody that she's giving a ticket to. You see like a woman on crutches that a guy's running and he bumps into her and doesn't bother to help her or say I'm sorry, and she gets mad at him. You see like the superintendent, right, of the building arguing with an electrician. So right off the bat, they've established what the theme of the movie is. It's like these people are all angry with each other, and that's kind of where it comes from. And that goes all through the movie, I think.
Yeah, it does. It's definitely there. But that could just be, hey, we're in New York. This is how it is in New York. You know what I mean?
Right.
So if you're not looking for that theme, you're not going to see it until they point it out and say, hey, everybody's got to be nice to each other. Which, like I mentioned, I think is a very corny idea for a theme. I think that's a corny concept.
Okay. So but then you said too that watching it this time, you did enjoy it. What was different about it this time?
Mainly, I was laughing throughout the movie, and I was like, didn't remember laughing so much. So that's what it was that kind of caught me off guard this time around. I didn't really much notice the theme per se, but when you brought it up, I was like, yeah, that's kind of a corny idea for a theme.
Yeah. But, like you said with the mayor, like, acting, treating people like dirt is every New Yorker's God-given right, that kind of thing. That's in there.
Yeah.
I do like that the Auld Lang Syne, when New Year's, the clock strikes midnight, Auld Lang Syne is what unites them, and it kind of what helps. They kind of get over themselves, which is a normal thing, like that song kind of. And then kind of getting personal, having family in New York, especially after 9/11, there was a sense of unity. The year after we went to go visit and we saw Ground Zero as a family, there was this feeling that everybody was treating each other, and it's probably different now because that's worn off, but the feeling in New York after 9/11 was a lot different. It's especially embodied in like one of the Spider-Man movies. I think the first one where he's being attacked by the Green Goblin and New York comes to his rescue. And yeah, it's cheesy, but just watching that in a theater after 9/11, there's just this sense of unity that was just very affecting, and it worked emotionally. It was a great beat. And so having that, it's just weird, like watching this movie and everything. One of the notes that I wrote too is in the beginning, you find out that the Ghostbusters were hated, like the bureaucrats churning on them and the city churning on them and making them pay for everything and turning them into kind of martyrs. That's very today. A lot of that stuff is going on today. A lot of the hate speech and the hatred is going on today, not just in New York, but everywhere. I'm glad you're off of social media, so you don't have to experience a lot of that stuff.
That's why I got off of it.
Yeah. So what I appreciated this time, and like I said, I've seen the movie maybe 4 times, once in the theater, hated it, second time thinking it's not that bad, watched it maybe a third time for some reason. And then this time, what I really appreciated was how much that theme strikes a chord today. And Reitman says that one of the reasons this movie failed at the box office, it wasn't like terrible. It debuted #1 at the box office. It had like the highest grossing numbers for the first day. It had the highest grossing weekend for any movie. And then the week after, all that was blown out of the water by Batman, obviously. But Reitman says the reason it failed is because Ghostbusters is basically, it's a positive movie that teaches positivity, and Batman is not a movie that teaches positivity. It's a movie that's very dark and it's very angry, and everybody's angry with each other. And that's, people jibed with that at the time because I think that's kind of what they wanted. That's what they were ready for. So I don't, why do you think it's just because of the bad stuff at the end? Why do you think this movie didn't do as well?
I would say so. I think, like you say, towards the end of the movie, it just loses the audience. I think it lost me as well. So I can see that being the reason for it's not doing as well as the first one. Because in the beginning of the movie, it does have those things. It does have the comedy, the character dynamics, the relationships. It's all there, and then at the end, it just kind of fizzles away, and it just kind of doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know.
No, you make a good point. I think that's accurate. I think that's about, it's well said.
Okay. So I think that's basically everything that I have on the movie watching this time. I probably have some other notes. What were there any other things that you wanted to mention while I go over my notes here?
Did we mention how great I thought Rick Moranis was in it? I think he was great in it. I enjoyed his character the most.
Why did you like him this time versus?
Maybe just because it's Rick Moranis. I don't know. I guess I just miss him. So it's fun to see him again.
Yeah. He's still with us.
I know. I'm saying he's not, but he's not doing anything.
Yeah, he's not quite
retired from acting. So
yeah. Yeah, he added a lot of humor to it. I like that a lot. The romance with Janine was kind of sweet.
Yeah.
Having that in there is harmless stuff. The other thing I did like too is they at least introduced the villain early, like Kurt Fuller, his character. They introduced him early on as opposed to the William Atherton character who appears like in the last half of the movie, just to add some antagonism.
I did like seeing Kurt Fuller and Brian Doyle Murray together because they're in Wayne's World together.
Yeah.
So I was like, hey, it's Noah from Wayne's World, and it's the what's his name? I forget his name in Wayne's World. What part Kurt Fuller plays, but he's the or something like that on set.
Yeah, he's the
that's right. He's like, but you didn't say 2 or 1.
Yeah. But he's the one that sides with Wayne and Garth at the end, right? Too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's funny.
Yeah.
Philip Baker Hall shows up in a scene. Ben Stein shows up in a scene.
He has like one line. And I was like, hey.
Yeah, I like that they had Kevin Dunn showed up at the beginning, and Venkman's that's really funny that Venkman's TV, like he runs a psychic TV show that's like a cheap cable.
Oh, right, that's right.
So Kevin Dunn is like, he's a psychic, and Chloe Webb, who was just in Twins that Ivan Reitman directed. That was funny having them in cameos. Cheech Marin showed up. I think they added him back in during pickups. He just has that one line, but it's pretty funny.
I think it would have been funnier if it was Cheech and Chong.
Yeah, it would have been.
But
maybe Chong was just buzzed out of his mind and couldn't be there. So I like that that they did introduce the villain a little bit earlier as opposed to just, but we need some antagonists to kind of show up. Anything else?
I'm wearing the Wilhelm Scream shirt because the actor who plays Vigo, his name is Wilhelm.
Yeah, that's right.
I thought it would have been funny if the Wilhelm Scream would have been there when his head exploded.
It would have been at least added something clever to it. I know that it's kind of like a David Prowse situation. He didn't know that they were going to dub over his voice.
Oh,
so he watched the movie and then Max von Sydow's voice, and he got so mad that he stormed out. Just because he mentioned like he had a split lip, and so he had a speech impediment, and he was always made fun of for it. And so why not? The sad thing that I have here. What was the last note that I have? The Henry Duchendorf and William Duchendorf, the twins that played the baby Oscar. Okay. Henry Duchendorf, he killed himself in 2017.
Oh, really?
He suffered from schizoaffective disorder, and so they found him like hung in his house. So I thought that was kind of, and then kind of going with the curse. Janet Margulin, who plays the prosecutor, she died like 4 years later of ovarian cancer. Okay. She was 50 years old. I thought it was kind of mind-blowing that the prosecutor in the movie, she looked like she's in her 30s, maybe her 20s, but she was 46 at the time of filming.
Really?
I thought that was interesting. Maybe the last thing I want to mention is, how do you think the special effects in Ghostbusters 2 compared to the effects in the first one?
I would say it wasn't as good. I noticed all the special effects moments, and I noticed that it was kind of like, well, that was kind of weird, and that didn't really work as well as I remember the first one working better for some reason. But I've noticed the special effects and think that was, I don't know.
Yeah.
not well done.
Well, do you think it's Star Wars 1977 versus Star Wars Special Edition 1997 effect? I know that, when we've talked about this before, when Lucas pioneered the special effects and ILM pioneered the special effects in Star Wars, none of that had been done before. And so even though it looks kind of primitive today, like if you put yourself in the mindset of when the movie was made, those special effects in the original Star Wars are mind-boggling the way that they're done. Yeah. And then when they did the special editions and they covered over everything with the CGI muck, I knew they could do that. Like, it wasn't impressive to me. It's like, great, like you're just doing what everybody else is doing instead of kind of leading the way and spearheading the movement of special effects. Because I know that the first Ghostbusters, like Reitman said, you released the movie with unfinished effects, and so to him, I'm sure it looks primitive. I just think that so much of the green screening and the everything that they use, like to process the ghosts and in front of the actors and stuff like that, it looked great, and because you hadn't seen that before. And so even though the second movie, it has a lot of, I think the special effects are better, but they're not as impressive because they weren't trying to pioneer anything.
They were just really noticeable. Like, it was really noticeable throughout the whole movie. Whenever they would have a special effect, it was like, oh, that's obviously, a green screen, or obviously matte painting or something like that. It was just obvious.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense.
Like, they didn't try to hide it or anything. They didn't try to like mix it with the real background. Like, the first one looked more real to me for some reason.
Interesting. Yeah, I just think that's how, maybe that is a Star Wars effect. It's just, the pioneering special effects that have never been done before are going to look better than stuff that's been done hundreds of times.
Yeah.
That you're kind of used to. Yeah, I think that's everything other than, the thing about Sigourney Weaver, I don't think we've talked about her a lot. If we're to mention, yeah. So I just noticed, because she's known as an iconic badass. She's Ripley in the Aliens and the Alien franchise, really. And so her scenes with Murray, it's easy to forget that she can also be like warm and funny and feminine. And yeah. I just think they had a good chemistry this time out. It wasn't as skeevy. It was a little more.
Yeah. And you know what? That might be another reason why I didn't like the first one. I didn't really think she was very attractive in the first one. And, a young me is not going to like an older Sigourney Weaver. You know what I mean? So I was like, she's ugly. And Bill Murray's not very, I don't know. I didn't like his face. So I was like, I don't like those two actors. And so I didn't like it. But I agree with you that I think they do have a chemistry. And I think it worked this time around as well. But a lot of it has to do with the dialogue in the script. So I give credit to Dan Aykroyd and Ramis for me liking this second movie.
Okay, good. So if there's nothing else to talk about, we might as well talk about whether this is worth a remake or worth remembering. Again, weird one. I would say this is probably worth a remake. There are good stuff in it, but it doesn't quite capture the spirit. Again, sorry for that pun. It doesn't capture the feeling of the first Ghostbusters for me. It doesn't capture what I loved about that movie. It doesn't enrapture me, or I don't. The lines are funny, but it's not as quotable as anything in the first one. And again, this movie, it really damaged that reputation of the first Ghostbusters. Like Murray, the reaction to it, he swore off making another sequel. And I think they had to blackmail him into showing up in the 2016. But again, he's not playing Bankman. He's playing a different version of himself. So yeah, that's just the short of it. The ending just doesn't. You can say that I'm getting way too angry about that ending and that I'm reading too much into it and I should just relax and just enjoy what it's doing. But again, the reason I just push against it is it's a complete 180 from what I loved about the first one. It just doesn't match everything that's so great about the 1984 movie, which again is not the greatest movie ever made. I'm not saying that. It's just, it was of its time and it made a dent. And so that's why Ghostbusters is important to me. I just thought it was really funny and scary and all the things that movies should be. So this movie is definitely them coming up with Ghostbusters Afterlife and maybe bringing, we don't know for sure, but we know that Murray-Aykroyd and Hudson and Weaver are credited in the cast for Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Okay.
Which again, directed by Jason Reitman, who's got a cameo in this movie. He's the kid at the beginning
he was in it. Yeah.
He tells, Ray, like, my dad says you're full of crap, which is kind of a funny meta line. So I'm interested to see where they go with Afterlife. I'm not kind of against it. I'm glad that they're doing kind of an in-universe sequel, but not as vengeance against the 2016 version because it didn't do what I needed it to do. That's not why
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to Afterlife. What do you think?
Well, like you, I think it's worth a remake. However, I did enjoy it, so I can't say it's not.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, for me, I wouldn't mind watching it again. I wouldn't put it in on purpose, but I wouldn't mind. It was funny. I was laughing throughout it. But they can remake it, and I wouldn't care. And I know they are remaking. There's like the Afterlife's coming out. But I don't have any plans to go see that. Like I'm not really that big into the whole franchise, so it doesn't mean much to me. So worth a remake for sure.
Okay, sounds good. So, all right, so let's go ahead and I know we like to do our outro topic. Let's how about we do like our top 3 sequels that kind of ruined the reputation of the original movie. Let's see if we can come up with any of those. We're always doing our top. Let's do like our bottom and see where that leads us. So we'll be back to kind of go over our top 3 maybe worst sequels.
All right, sounds good.
And welcome back. Briefly, I just wanted to mention, we did mention the special effects. I talked about how the Richard Edlund studio handled the first movie, but I forgot to mention that ILM handled the special effects duties for Ghostbusters 2, which Dennis Muren, the special effects guru who worked under Edlund, he actually spearheaded the effects in here. And even though the first movie had a rush production schedule, this was even tougher. I think they had like 4 weeks, and Muren had like 4 different teams working at the same time, like every day, to try and get the special effects in. So that might explain some of the rushness of the effects, but they had a lot of stuff smoothed out. So a lot of the effects that they kind of were trying and attempting in the first one, they knew exactly how to do a lot of that stuff. I know there's a shot of, we talked about Margulin, how as the prosecutor, she's dragged upside down, and you see her like get dragged out of her room, like, and the ghost disappears through the top of the door. And it's interesting because you think it doesn't hit you because you're like, well, I see that all the time. But back then in 89, they didn't have computers or CG. You're like, how did they do that? And I think Corridor Crew did like a retrospective, and they looked at it, and they just had the actress on a wire, but then they did like they cut the top of the ceiling or the top of the door out. So that wasn't there on set. And then they took a model and they transposed it on top of that image just perfectly angled, so it looked like it was there. And so that stuff is impressive, but we take that for advantage because we see that all the time now. We don't bother to think because we just know that computers do that.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. Was there anything else that you forgot to mention about the movie?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, well, let's go ahead. I know I harped on maybe a little too hard about how it kind of ruined my memories of the first one, but it's not the worst offender. I think there are worse movies out there that kind of took everything great about what made an original movie great, and then they just kind of shot it out the window, just right from the off. So I kind of wanted to talk about the 3 movies that we thought are most maybe dispiriting without descending into a hate fest.
Okay.
But you went first last time with your top 3 Wes Craven movies. I'll go first. I'm going to pick Jaws. We've talked about Jaws before, and maybe it's not so much the second movie, which Jaws 2, without Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw, first of all, it's not the same movie. And what they try to do with Jaws 2 is it kind of comes off as a slasher movie, with the shark picking off these horny teenagers all through it. It's interesting, but the shark looks faker for some reason. Like you think the technology would have improved. And then just by the third movie, with all the wonky 3D and the wonky plot, and then it cut to, Jaws the Revenge, which we talked about before, where it's just the filmmaking is so terrible. It just took what was the first Jaws shouldn't have worked. Like the shark wasn't working. Like they didn't have a lot of the plot hammered out a lot of the time. They came up with the ending on set, but it worked like gangbusters because Spielberg's a genius. Like he was right out of the gate, he's ready and raring to go, just hungry. And so it works kind of in spite of itself. And the second, it couldn't manage the same formula. So yeah, Jaws is the first kind of franchise that kind of shot itself in the foot almost right out of the gate.
Okay. Well, my first pick, it was easy to pick this one. And I know I always harp on this movie, but it's a movie that I just cannot, stand. And that is Ocean's 12. And I say that because Ocean's 11 was so good, and
Yeah.
I liked so many things about it, and it was so fun to watch that movie and the heist and the character development and the dynamics they had. It was great. And I think I said before too that I think Steven Soderbergh is kind of hit or miss.
Yeah.
And Ocean's 11 was a hit, and then they just missed completely on Ocean's 12. For me, anyway, I had a hard time even just getting through it. And I saw it with she was my, I think we were engaged at the time when we saw it together, but
Yeah.
my wife, we saw it together, and we weren't like talking throughout the movie. But then once it got out and we was let out, we walked out with the crowd and we turned to each other and said, that was the worst thing I've ever seen. And like the people in front of us turned around like shocked that we thought it was a bad movie. And I just couldn't find anything that I liked about it. Like the more I thought about it, the more I hated it. And so anyway, it just wasn't a good movie. And so then they come out with Ocean's 13, and that should have been the sequel to Ocean's 11. That should have been the next movie, because I think Ocean's 12 was just like didn't even belong in the series.
Right. Well, we've talked about it before. What I will say is that it wasn't an Ocean's movie. I think they took a script that was written and they tailored it.
Yeah, and I knew that. And I think that's what the problem is.
And so a lot of the byplay with the characters is not there because it just isn't in the script. And they write a lot of the characters and put them in jail.
However,
so they're out of the picture, right? And so it just doesn't have the same thing. Okay.
And you also had Soderbergh trying to his experimental stuff that just didn't work.
Yeah.
So just stop experimenting, just make the movie.
Yeah. Just wasn't what you liked about the first, which is what we're talking
exactly.
about.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one, I wanted to go in order, but since you mentioned just that, not quite working, something kind of hit me. I'm going to say Men in Black. Because the first Men in Black, which I don't think I've talked about, it's such, I don't want to call it a master class, but every scene in that movie is just, it hammers the theme home of everything is not what it appears. And it's just amazing. When next time you watch Men in Black, watch how every single scene hits that theme, even with the little mosquito at the beginning. You think the mosquito, you're going to follow it, but then a dragonfly comes and swallows it. Yeah. And then you follow the dragonfly, but then it gets squished. So everything is not as it seems. And then you see the van with the guy driving the illegal aliens across the border, which one of them turns out to be an actual alien from outer space, and so it's the whole movie is just a twist after twist after twist on things aren't what they appear to be. And so, and it's funny. It's the heir to the throne of Ghostbusters. I think no movie has matched it for comedy and chemistry between the leads like Men in Black did. And the second movie, it just seems like a cynical, I know that it was like 80 minutes or something like that, so they could squeeze in an extra showing. And it maybe has a few flashes of the humor that made the original so unique. A lot of the Will Smith humor, there's maybe a couple instances, the part where, and they just repeat the same plot again. Just they switch it so that, Tommy Lee Jones is the fish out of water. But there's maybe one funny part where he's trying to bring Jay's memory back and they get flushed. And Agent Jay's like, boy, when you're back with your agent, you used to love being flushed, boy. You'd be all, flush me, Dave, flush me. And I'd be like, nah. And that was it. Like there's only maybe one or two of that patented comedy. And then they have these weird scenes of aliens in a locker. And Johnny Knoxville shows up as an alien, but then I'm not sure what happens. He flat out disappears from the movie like 3/4 of the way through, and they never show him again. There's no exit for him. They mentioned that he was it's just really off-putting the way the humor doesn't work and the way it repeats everything. So Men in Black, I don't know. Did you like the second Men in Black?
I don't think I've seen it. I maybe parts of it, but I don't think I've seen it all the way through.
Yeah, I wouldn't bother. So even when the third movie came around, which has Josh Brolin just doing a hilarious impression. I did
see that one, and I loved his impression.
Yeah, so great. But the second movie just tarnished it to the point where you're watching the third one going, this still isn't as good. And it's not bad, but that's the second movie that kind of tarnishes the reputation. What's your next sequel?
I'm going to go ahead and pick Cars 2. Because again, kind of like Ocean's 12, I don't think Cars 2 is the sequel. I think Cars 3 is the sequel to Cars. And I really enjoyed Cars, but Cars 2 is more like a Mater's Tall Tale episode, like a really long, Mater in the Ghost Light type episode thing. Plus it was just weird. It just didn't work for me. I don't like making Mater the main character. I think it should have stuck with the formula that it had before. And that's why I like Cars 3 as, being the sequel to Cars 1.
A Lightning McQueen movie instead of a Mater,
Yes.
the tow truck movie.
Yeah.
Which is, I get what they were trying to experiment. It's like a weird spy movie. It's fine. But if your lead character is not the most enjoyable character to follow, then you know what I mean?
And Mater's enjoyable. It's just that they had those little tall tales they were doing, and when they should have stuck with that. It should have been one of those episodes.
So you liked him in like spurts as opposed to like running the whole thing.
Exactly.
Cars is a weird franchise too, in that the first one is fun because it invents this world, but by the third one, when you really start, it's like you go down a rabbit hole of like, so who designed the mountains to look like cars? Like, who built these buildings? You know what I mean? You like it. You start, once you see too much of it, you start really questioning what's going on. So
I can see that.
That's a strange one. So I was gonna pick a different one, but since we've got Halloween Kills out, I'm gonna mention Halloween as a franchise that just went out the window for me. I know a lot of people love this franchise, and a lot of people are going through it right now, especially with Halloween. And they're watching these movies and they're enjoying them. And I don't want to take anything away with that. But like I mentioned before, watching Halloween, the 1978 version, after I'd seen Freddy and Jason and all these imitations, and then seeing how elegant and artful Halloween was, and how, you know, I'm not a big gore fan unless it's a zombie movie and I want to see the makeup and stuff like that. So gore is not enjoyable for me, especially in these slasher movies. So just to see, especially Halloween 2, just copy the formula of every other copycat and having it go for the gore just for no reason. And then every movie after that, even the third one, which a lot of people like to say that is good because it's different, there's still a lot of cheap gore gags and things that don't make sense in there. So just right off the bat, and I don't think there's been like New Nightmare, Halloween H2O is probably the only Halloween movie that I even halfway enjoyed. I know a lot of people don't like it because it's more a Scream movie than a Halloween movie, but it goes back to the aesthetic of Michael Myers doesn't have to kill everybody in the most brutal ways. You know, he goes back to killing, other than a cheap joke at the beginning when he kills Joseph Gordon-Levitt with a skate to the face, like a hockey skate to the face or something like that. Michael goes back to using a knife, and it's more suspense, and you don't see a lot of the gore stuff. So just right out of the gate, the Halloween movies they just don't do it for me. Even the second one's just a bastardization of everything that I enjoyed about the original.
Okay, that's a good pick. For my third pick, I'm going to go ahead and go with Speed 2, Cruise Control, because you and I saw Speed together a long time ago for the first time. And we both really enjoyed it. I still really enjoy that movie. It's fun. But Speed 2, you just don't need that movie. You just don't need it. It doesn't belong.
Well, it's funny that they call it Speed, but they're on an ocean liner. I don't. It's like, why didn't they just make it on a horse?
Well, first of all, there's no Keanu Reeves in it. That's a problem. So, and then it's on a boat on a cruise ship. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, Jason Patrick's not. I like Jason Patrick, but he's not quite as charismatic or enjoyable as Keanu Reeves. Yeah. And so you have Sandra Bullock's character, who's kind of a whiny, like woe is me type that runs the whole. I don't know. It just doesn't work. Just doesn't work. So yeah, Speed. Okay, so my three, what did I have? I had Jaws, I had Men in Black, and I had Halloween. What were your three sequels that kind of pooped the bed?
Ocean's 12, Cars 2, and Speed 2.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so next time
we have a guest, right?
We have a guest. Yes, my friend Rob from Crooked Table Productions. He had me on an inaugural episode of something he called Close Watch, where he takes like people who have a very close connection to a movie and he says, bring this movie on and we'll talk about it. And so he brought me on and we chatted for Field of Dreams, which I know we've mentioned this on the podcast before.
Yeah.
But it was just great being able to just chat nonstop, just concentrating on that for an hour, and why Field of Dreams means so much to me. So obviously I want to make sure that people listen to that episode, but Rob is such a good guy and I've been following him for a while, and he had such good questions. And it's one of those things where I was like, would you like to come on our podcast? He's like, sure, I'd love to. And so he, after some finagling and finally getting our schedules to match, he's chosen An American Tail.
Oh, okay.
The Don Bluth production, which, spoiler alert, I think is probably one of the better Don Bluth productions after he left Disney. But he wanted to chat about Fievel. And so we'll do that about the mouse immigrants, and we'll see how that conversation goes. You've seen American Tail?
Yeah, a long time ago. So it'll be fun.
All right. So it'll be good to revisit. All right. So American Tail next time with my friend Rob. And yeah, I don't know if I'll ask if he wants us to give out his full name, but I'll just call him. I don't even know if I'm supposed to call him Rob. I think he's just Crooked Table. Maybe that's all. I'll ask all this stuff. We'll figure it out. But yeah, next time we'll talk American Tail. But until then, I'm Darren Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And we'll see you next time, guys.